You use money every single day. You work for it, stress over it, save it, chase it. But what if money was never truly designed to make people free? Because thousands of years ago, ancient rulers discovered something terrifying. People controlled by fear will eventually rebel. But people controlled through debt often obey willingly. And once civilizations learned how to turn human survival into numbers, history changed forever. Imagine waking up 5,000 years ago. No banks, no salaries, no online payments, no paper currency. If you wanted food, you hunted or farmed it yourself. If you wanted clothes, you made them. At first, human societies survived through barter. You give me wheat, I give you milk. Simple. But there was a major problem. Trade only worked if both people wanted something from each other at the exact same time. And as civilizations expanded, that system became painfully inefficient. Empires needed something more powerful. Something that could store value, simplify trade, create trust between strangers. That's when humanity created one of the most influential systems in history: money. But the first versions of money were nothing like modern currency. Most people imagine ancient coins when they think about old money.
But the earliest financial systems were actually built around debt records. In ancient Mesopotamia, around 3000 BCE, temples recorded who owed grain, silver, labor, livestock. Human civilization itself began organizing around obligation. Not freedom, obligation. Think about that carefully. One of humanity's greatest inventions wasn't originally based on wealth. It was based on debt. And once debt entered society, human psychology began changing forever. Because debt creates emotional pressure, fear, dependence, shame. A man with nothing to lose can be dangerous. But a man trapped inside obligations becomes predictable.
Ancient rulers understood this surprisingly early. And honestly, modern society still operates in a very similar way. Most money today isn't even physical anymore. Your salary? Numbers on a screen. Your savings? Digital entries. Your debt? Also numbers. Yet those invisible numbers determine where you live, how stressed you feel, how much freedom you have, and sometimes even how people treat you. The system evolved. Human psychology didn't. As civilizations became larger, trade required something even more important than gold: trust. People needed to believe that what they accepted today would still have value tomorrow. That's why temples became some of the first financial centers in human history. Not just religious buildings, economic control centers. In places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, temples stored grain, silver, records of transactions. Priests tracked debts. Rulers enforced payments. And because religion controlled morality, people trusted the system deeply. Think about how powerful that combination was. Spiritual authority plus financial authority. If someone owed money, the temple knew. If taxes weren't paid, rulers knew. And slowly, human survival became tied to invisible systems of value. That changed civilization forever. Here's something strange about gold. You can't eat it. You can't drink it. You can't survive winter with it. Yet humans became obsessed with it.
Why? Because gold represented stability, power, permanence. Over time, gold became psychologically connected to status and authority. Kings stored it. Empires fought wars for it. Merchants crossed continents searching for it. But rulers understood something deeper. If people spend their lives chasing symbols of wealth, they become emotionally easier to control because distracted populations rarely challenge systems deeply. But money was about to become far more dangerous because one empire discovered that currency could do more than support trade. It could shape human behavior itself, and no civilization mastered that better than Rome. Rome didn't just conquer nations with armies. It conquered them with economic trust.
And soon, Roman rulers would discover how to manipulate money itself, while millions of citizens slowly became dependent on the system. The Roman Empire didn't collapse overnight. It slowly weakened from the inside. And one of the biggest reasons was money. Because Rome discovered something terrifying. If you control currency, you can quietly control the emotions, behavior, and survival of millions of people. But eventually, that same system began destroying the empire itself. Most people think Rome became powerful because of its military. But Rome's true strength was economic stability. At its peak, the empire connected millions of people through one trusted financial system. That system relied heavily on the Roman silver coin, the denarius. At first, the coin had real value.
It contained significant amounts of silver, which meant people trusted it. Soldiers accepted it. Merchants traded with it across continents. Citizens stored wealth using it. And trust created something incredibly powerful: predictability. For ordinary people, Roman money made life feel stable. And stable populations are easier to govern. But there was a problem. Empires are expensive. Rome constantly needed money for wars, roads, public buildings, armies, entertainment, political control. Eventually, Rome began running out of silver, and instead of reducing spending, emperors chose something much more dangerous. They secretly reduced the silver inside the coins. At first, almost nobody noticed. The coins looked identical, but their real value slowly decreased. This became one of history's earliest examples of currency debasement. And over time, inflation exploded. Prices increased. Trust weakened. People became anxious. Now think about modern life for a second. Imagine working harder every year, yet everything keeps becoming more expensive. Food, rent, healthcare, fuel. Your money still exists, but its purchasing power slowly weakens. That's exactly how many Romans slowly felt. Not instantly, gradually. And gradual decline is psychologically dangerous because humans adapt slowly to suffering. But Rome realized something even darker. A financially stressed population can still remain obedient if it stays distracted. And that's when Rome perfected one of history's most powerful psychological strategies.
The Romans called it bread and circuses. The strategy was simple. If citizens had food, entertainment, emotional distraction, they would remain politically passive. So Rome invested heavily in gladiator fights, public games, massive spectacles. Millions became emotionally absorbed in entertainment, while the financial foundations underneath society slowly weakened. And honestly, modern systems aren't very different. Today, the distractions changed. Social media, endless streaming, outrage-driven news, dopamine-based apps. But the psychology remains almost identical. Distracted people rarely challenge systems deeply. Rome also learned that dependence creates obedience. The more citizens relied on the empire for grain, money, security, entertainment, the harder it became for them to resist authority. And dependence slowly changed Roman psychology. Because once people become addicted to comfort, freedom starts feeling risky. This pattern repeats constantly throughout history. A financially independent person can challenge systems, but a deeply dependent person usually avoids uncertainty. Rome understood this perfectly, and over time, many citizens became more focused on preserving comfort than protecting freedom. But Rome's greatest mistake wasn't inflation. It wasn't corruption. It wasn't even political instability. It was luxury. Because civilizations rarely collapse when they become weak first. They collapse when they become soft. As Rome became wealthier, its elites became obsessed with status and pleasure. Massive villas, exotic food, luxury clothing, public displays of wealth. But historians noticed something disturbing. As comfort increased, discipline weakened. Citizens became less resilient, more pleasure-driven, emotionally fragile, dependent on systems. And eventually, Rome began decaying internally, not just economically, psychologically. By the time many Romans realized their system was collapsing, trust had already been damaged. And once people stopped trusting money, they eventually stopped trusting institutions themselves. Rome proved something future civilizations would never forget. Financial systems can control populations more efficiently than fear ever could. But after Rome collapsed, a new kind of power quietly emerged from the shadows. Not emperors, bankers. After the fall of Rome, Europe collapsed into chaos. Trade routes broke apart. Violence spread across kingdoms. Economies became unstable. But while kings fought wars in public, a different kind of power quietly began rising in the shadows. Not warriors, not emperors, bankers. And over time, these financial families became so influential that even kings became dependent on them. Because history was entering a terrifying new phase, the age of invisible power. When Rome collapsed, Europe lost much of its economic stability. Different regions used different currencies. Travel became dangerous. Large-scale trade slowed dramatically. But inside the chaos, merchant families saw opportunity, money lending. At the time, many religious authorities publicly condemned charging interest, but rulers still needed financing. Wars were expensive. Kingdoms needed infrastructure. Trade networks needed investment. And slowly, merchant bankers became essential to power itself. One of the most famous examples was the Medici family in Renaissance Italy. Originally merchants and bankers, the Medicis built enormous influence through finance. Not by conquering nations with armies, but by controlling credit. Because once rulers borrowed money, they became dependent on the people financing them. And dependence creates leverage. This is where money became truly dangerous. Because for the first time in history, private financial power began becoming stronger than political power itself. And honestly, modern society still works in surprisingly similar ways. Credit permanently changed human civilization. Before advanced banking systems, growth was slower. But once borrowing expanded, entire societies accelerated. Cities expanded faster. Businesses grew larger. Empires funded more wars. But debt also created invisible pressure. Because borrowing from the future creates stress in the present. And stress changes human behavior. A person trapped under financial pressure becomes more anxious, more emotionally reactive, more dependent on stability, less willing to take risks. That psychological reality became one of the foundations of financial control throughout history. Even today, millions of people spend years trapped inside systems of loans, mortgages, credit card debt, financial anxiety. The systems evolved, but psychologically, the pressure still feels ancient. As banking systems became more powerful, society slowly transformed. Kings still wore crowns, but increasingly, financial institutions influenced the direction of nations from behind the scenes. Because controlling money means controlling trade, expansion, war, survival. And the people controlling those systems often remained invisible to ordinary citizens. That's what made financial power different from military power. Armies use visible force. Financial systems use invisible influence. And invisible systems are harder to fight because most people barely understand them. But then, humanity entered an even darker phase because eventually, money itself stopped being connected to real physical value.
And once that happened, financial systems gained a level of power ancient civilizations could barely imagine. For centuries, gold and silver helped create trust in currency. People believed coins had value because the metal itself had value. But over time, financial systems became increasingly abstract. Paper money expanded. Banks created credit. Governments printed currency. And slowly, human civilization transitioned into something strange. An economy built mostly on belief. Today, most global money exists digitally, not physically. And yet those invisible numbers determine where people live, who succeeds, who struggles, and sometimes who survives. The modern financial system became one of the most psychologically powerful structures ever created. Because people no longer chase survival alone. They chase financial security. And often, they spend their entire lives doing it. Money began as a tool for trade, but over thousands of years, it evolved into something much larger. A system capable of shaping entire civilizations through trust, debt, fear, dependence, and belief. And maybe the darkest part of all, most people participate in the system every day without ever fully understanding how deeply it influences their lives. Because the greatest systems of control rarely feel like control. They simply feel normal.